So joining us now is Brian Cook, bass player extraordinaire. Brian, what is the current rundown? Is it Russian circles and Sumac? Is there anything else that I'm leaving out apart from Botch, the way that most of us encountered you initially?
Only thing I have going actively now, those two
Okay.
bands. I'll occasionally help out friends record if they need some bass filled in, but yeah.
Awesome.
As far
And
as serious projects,
yeah, how are
yeah,
you
Russian
holding up? I
circles.
think for anybody watching this in the distant future, I think we're in, for us, this is like month 7 of shelter in place. How are you guys doing up there?
We're doing pretty good. We're kind of lucky because we got a house about 2 years ago, and so we're still sort of enamored by where we live and getting situated and nesting and all that. So if anything, it's kind of forced us to actually finish unpacking and all that stuff. So, it could be a lot worse. If it had been like 2 years ago when all this hit, when we were still like in a friend's furnished Airbnb trying to figure out what we were doing, it would have been much more of a nightmare scenario. But
No doubt.
all things considered, we're pretty lucky. No. How are you holding up over there?
Good. We too are doing like a lot of home improvement projects. My partner has gotten me to change out all the light fixtures in the house and lots of spring cleaning. I'm like selling off my CD collection since all they've been doing is taking up space for like the last 8 years. I don't even have
Yeah.
a way to listen to CDs, so it makes no sense to keep the physical media around. So
Yeah. I have like 3 milk crates and a couple binders full of CDs out in our shed. I think I have like a few assorted like newer purchases in the house, but yeah, it's like I don't know. I
I'm
never
here
know
to
what to
tell
do with
you,
them. I feel bad.
you can make as much as $1 per CD that you sell on eBay. I'm here to tell you.
Yeah, and then at that point, it's like, well, it's not taking up that much space in the basement.
No.
It's might as well hold on to it until that CD revival.
Yeah, it's barely worthwhile. So it's more of a hobby at this point than anything else.
Yeah.
So let's get right into the historical stuff. How did you get started playing bass, and why bass and not guitar or some other instrument, or have you always done both?
I started playing bass when I was 14. I was living in Hawaii. I was a military brat, so my dad was stationed out there, or my parents were stationed out there. And I think I chose bass just because I didn't have a lot of confidence in playing guitar. I'm left-handed, and finding like a left-handed instrument in my hometown in Hawaii seemed like an impossible task. So, like, well, I could probably manage playing bass right-handed, So I bought a $90 right-handed bass and kind of tinkered around on that for a while and picked up guitar maybe a year later and didn't know how to play that. But now I kind of split my time evenly between the two. When I'm at home, I play a lot of guitar just because it's easier just to pick up an acoustic and start banging away on it as opposed to, plugging everything in and worrying about the neighbors yelling about noise and all that. But yeah.
Well, it's surprising how many of us there are out there. We are legion, people who are naturally left-handed but ended up playing right. I'm kind of glad I did. I don't know if you are, but I feel like being a lefty playing bass righty gave me a lot of facility for fingering stuff. And obviously, as you alluded to, your options for finding instruments are, 20 times better because they make so few left-handed instruments.
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah, I
there's
didn't
any
realize you were a
advantage?
lefty as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I mean, it seems weird when, it's like, my left hand being the fingering hand, that seems like be like the fine motor skill hand. So it's almost weird that people would gravitate towards using their dumb hand for fretting. I think the only time it really trips me up is if I do like a lot of like finger picking stuff on guitar. Then I feel like I'm an idiot with my hands.
I've made a terrible mistake.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, I do bass and guitar all wrong because I love, finger picking on guitar and then playing a bass with a pick, where it probably should be the other way around, but
Right.
I don't know.
So how did you end up on the mainland, and when did you connect with the Botch guys? What was your introduction to the Botch? Are not exactly a hardcore band, but for the lack of a better term, let's call it the hardcore scene.
Well, I was living in Hawaii. I was still, I lived in Hawaii until I was 15. And by that time I'd started going to shows and buying records and, the options for underground, punk subculture and stuff in Hawaii was pretty grim. There wasn't a whole lot going on, but there were local bands and, every once in a while, bands would do like the stopover date in Honolulu on the way out to Japan or Australia.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a taste of what people on the mainland got through that. But then moved to the mainland when I was 15 to Fort Lewis, which is maybe an hour south of Seattle. And first year I was here, didn't have a driver's license, didn't have any friends, didn't have any sort of connection to any sort of scene or community music based at all. So I got in my room and played bass and wrote songs and listened to cassette tapes and, just kind of lived in my own little world. And then my junior year of high school, I had trigonometry with Dave Knutson, who was the guitar player in Botch. And I overheard him one day asking someone that sat next to him in class if they knew any bass players because he wanted to start a band. And I stepped in. I was like, I'll be in the band. I don't care what you're playing, but I'll be in the band. And I don't remember what the pitch was back then in terms of what kind of music he was wanting to play, but that was probably like 93. So it was sort of at the heyday of Seattle grunge. And I think everyone's kind of gravitating towards like Soundgarden, like the heavier end of the grunge scene in terms of
Sure.
music that they wanted to play. But Dave said that he also wanted to cover Too Drunk to Fuck by Dead Kennedys. And that was like the thing. I was like, oh, okay, I'm in. Like, as long as we're playing Too Drunk to Fuck, I'm in. And then within a month's time, we were going to hardcore shows, and that quickly kind of skewered the trajectory of the band from being like a heavy grunge punk crossover thing to just being like all in on hardcore. That's kind of where it all started.
And was that the Botch lineup from the jump? Like, was Varela already involved? And
Yeah, so trying to remember. Like, I think Dave and Tim, the drummer, had already practiced together a couple times.
mm-hmm.
Then I think I was the next one on board, and then I think Dave Varela was maybe the last person to get added to the lineup. But it all kind of happened pretty quick. So
Yeah.
I don't think there was any major time lag where we were operating as anything but the four of us. So
Yep.
yeah. And then
Outstanding.
I don't think we started playing shows at like house shows and stuff like within a couple months, but then didn't really figure out what we were doing for maybe a year or two, and then that's kind of when Botch, as people knew it, really started.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you have subsequently learned that you wish you'd known day one when you started playing bass? Like, are there any bad habits that you got into or things you wish you'd done differently in your approach to the instrument early on?
Probably a lot. I mean, I've never been like a trained person at all. Like, I took piano lessons as a kid, but it didn't stick. And then I tried to play saxophone briefly in high school, and that really didn't stick. I've just never been super interested in like theory or, doing scales and things like that,
Sure.
which is kind of unfortunate because I feel like, having those habits and that knowledge would probably be really helpful now that I'm older. But I don't know. It always seemed like approaching instruments like completely from a completely clueless place made it more exciting, like more mystery, and just sort of slowly figuring things out, and just sort of doing whatever sounded good was a lot more satisfying than having a teacher kind of show you like this is the major scale, now just play this 10 times, and all that stuff you'd eventually kind of figure out on your own anyway. And I don't know, the discovery of it, I felt like was more exciting than someone just telling it to me and having to memorize it. So I have a lot of bad habits in terms of how I fret things. I mean, for so much of the botch years, like my strumming pattern was all from the elbow, so there was no like finesse. It was all just banging on it. So I was probably hitting all 4 strings at any given time, and I was not a very nuanced player, and now slowly with time I've gotten better at playing with some technique, but it's still terrible. I'm sure I have bad habits.
Well, I think at least with the botch stuff, the sort of caveman approach probably suited what you guys were doing really well. So it wasn't necessarily an issue at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't trying to be a traditional, skilled band. We were just trying to, a bunch of miscreants banging on stuff. So, it worked out.
Awesome. Well, let's. At what point did you discover baritone guitar stuff? Because I noticed that you mentioned earlier that you are about 50% bass, 50% guitar, and I know at least with Sumac, last time I saw you guys came through, you're playing some kind of baritone something, I reckon. So how did you get introduced to that, and what's been your journey with the baritones?
Well, baritones, I started playing baritone, I guess it was sort of towards the end of These Arms Are Snakes. I got a baritone around 2007 or 2008. And, it was always just trying to split the difference, I think. It's like I like playing chords on bass, but a lot of times it just gets muddy and it doesn't really translate super well. And baritones are just nice because it has that sort of deeper, rich reverberation, but you can still do a little bit more melodically with it. So it was just kind of the logical next step in trying to do stuff that was a bit more sophisticated. But yeah, and I've also tried out like bass sixes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Bass sixes, I'm no good at. Maybe if I was in the Cure or something, I'd find a good use for it. But that's too many fat strings too close to each other. But baritones, they kind of work out pretty nice.
That's rad. What is the current stable, like all Dunnable stuff at this point? Your baritones, or what else do you have?
Let's see, I have a Dunnable baritone I got a couple months ago, and that's been really exciting. Prior to that, it had a first stack custom baritone. Mm-hmm. That was the first baritone I got. And that thing, I've been playing that for 12 or 13 years, and I love it. My only issue with making the leap to the Dunnable was just that I had a Bigsby put on the baritone, and mm-hmm. Bigsby bridges are such a pain in the ass to change strings on, and I had no idea. I never played on one. I was just excited about the vibrato option, but like threading the end of the baritone string onto the saddle and having to cramp it to have it wrap around and all that stuff. If you've never fucked with a Bigsby, don't start, because it's a total pain in the ass. Like I can't restring the thing without pricking my fingers at least once. So it's like always like a thing that involves a little bloodshed. So, with touring, it's just like, I don't want to have to spend 45 minutes changing strings, before a show. So the Dunnable made way more sense. And it's been super nice to have a new instrument, because, whenever you get like a new instrument, you already automatically start playing things a little differently, and then you like discover new riffs, and it kind of came at a good point where I was I think with COVID I was kind of in a bit of a musical rut and wasn't really coming up with anything new that I was excited about. And rushing circles, working on some demos, and I was trying to come up with some ideas and just like banging my head against a wall, not able to come up with something, and then got the Dunnable baritone, and within 48 hours had finally figured out some guitar parts to some demos we've been working on since January. It was like, okay, there it is. All I needed was a whole new guitar, but there it finally is. So,
Outstanding. So you're not like a crazy gear guy like me. Like I buy, a new piece of gear like every couple of weeks probably. So is there, I'm not sure how much you've turned over in your career. Is there anything that you've parted with that you would absolutely like give one of your legs to have back, or do you have everything that you've ever bought in your life?
I tend to hold on to things. I mean, all the early fuzz stuff that I was super excited about were like the old Russian, green big muffs.
Mm-hmm.
I probably had 5 or 6 of those.
Sure.
But that was towards the end of Botch and the beginning of These Arms Are Snakes, where it was, the shows were messy. People were falling all over it, spilling beer on it, packing away at the end of the night, covered in sweat and whatever else had gotten on it during the set. And, those things just corroded so fast, especially those green big muffs were just like big rust boxes.
Yeah, totally.
So even though those things back in the day, I mean, I could get them for like $50 or $60 off of eBay, and it was not a problem just ordering a new one when the switch on those gave out. But man, I just pulverized and rusted out so many of them, and now those things are like $200 or $300. Kind of these highly sought after things. It's like, man, I destroyed so many of those.
Luckily, there's no shortage of clones that actually have functional parts inside these days. So, and do you still have do you still have the sorry, do you still have the Botch grabber? Was it G3?
It was a grabber. Yeah, it was not the G3. It was like one of the ones with the sliding pickup.
Sure.
I do still have it, but that was another one where those pickups on those grabbers were, the coils were dipped in epoxy of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And I just corroded that thing. I didn't know how to take care of my stuff, so I would just sweat all over it and then just throw it in a case.
Yeah. Or
if it was like pedals, I would just throw it in a bag and didn't wrap my cables properly, just like threw everything into the back of the van, and then wondered why my stuff was always broken. But yeah, the grabber, the pickups on that totally went out. Tuning pegs got screwed up. The intonation on that was always bad. Like playing anything above the 12th fret was kind of a no-no, which I guess is actually just a good rule to live by anyway nowadays. But in general, yeah, like it was not like the most reliable instrument. And once the pickups went out, and I tried swapping out some other style pickups, but nothing sounded the same. And I wound up getting like a Gibson Ripper a few years later that was, there's a whole other issue along those lines where it was this old Ripper that had been in someone's closet for decades. So it was like this pristine, barely played Ripper. It was awesome. Mm-hmm. And then I had it for maybe 2 years, and every time I picked it up, I noticed that it was getting kind of sticky, even though I wasn't like playing it live or anything. There was something like weirdly tacky with the strings and the neck. And then like the pick guard started cracking, even though I wasn't like taking it out of the apartment. And then the pickups on that went out. And what I found out was whatever year that Ripper was, it had a tortoiseshell pick guard, and they made it out of some substance that it oxidized when it was exposed to air for too long, and it like let off this gas that caused all the wiring and all the string, anything metal on it just started oxidizing. So like, because it had been like closed up and like in a case in the closet for 20 years had been totally fine. But the second I had opened it up and like just had it out, it just started decaying, and I wound up like selling it to someone for basically like parts when I left New York. And that was one of the ones that was a real bummer, because it's like by the time I figured out what was going on with it, like it was basically a useless instrument. Like,
damn,
the body was sort of okay, but even like a lot of the finish on it was just kind of like weirdly tacky and fucked up. So
yeah,
that was a
that
bummer.
era of Gibson, like the Norland Gibson era, they were really scraping the bottom of the barrel for materials and stuff. Like I remember some of the Gibson Sonexes and stuff. Like those bodies are basically made out of sawdust. Like it was like press board.
Yeah.
It's very strange. And I remember like you were talking about how cheap those Russian muffs used to be. I remember when you can get a grabber or a G3 or a ripper for like $200. But every
Yeah.
one of them that I ever came across, the necks were twisted or bent or warped or something. Like I never got one with a straight neck. So
Yeah. I mean, they were great if you found a good one.
yeah,
Like, because even like the original Botch one I had, again, as long as you weren't playing it up high, like it sounded good, it played well, but
looked great,
yeah, just
sounded
like
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
but then it just dissolved. And then Ripper, same thing, and then I wound up buying a knockoff Ripper from some guy in the woods, maybe like 15 years ago, and it's
Was it like a
definitely a knock.
Japanese clone from back then, like 70s?
It must be. I mean, it says Gibson on it, but like the Gibson logo is like obviously it's almost like a vinyl lettering that they put on. It's
Oh well.
real sketchy, but it's one of the Rippers that has the like the rotary pickup switch,
Sure.
and that thing actually played great and is still like a really solid instrument. So it's like the one knockoff I had is the one that actually survived of all the grabbers that I had. So that just kind of goes to show you the quality that Gibson had back in the day.
Yeah, not so hot.
But if you find a good one, they're great.
Yep. So what are the current rigs that you're playing? I guess you probably have separate rigs for the two different bands, but like run down what the Russian Circles rig consists of.
With Russian Circles, the touring rig is a Varellin Meat Smoke and an 810, and then a bunch of pedals, which we can get into if we want to go that route, and then an electrical guitar company Series 2, one of these things,
Hell yes.
and then a second amp, which is like a dark glass Alpha Omega tube amp through an Emperor 118, and that runs the Moog Taurus.
Oh wow.
So, and then with Sumac, it's kind of just whatever I can get my hands on. I've been using the dark glass amp for that, just because it's easy to travel with.
Sure.
Most Sumac stuff involves some flying of some kind, but yeah, dark glass amp with a 810, and then we've been trying to keep the Sumac pedal board stuff pretty minimal, just for the sake of not complicating things. So I usually have a Fuzzrocious rat tail for distortion, or just kind of the constant tone on that, and then I kind of cycle through a few different fuzzes, and then a whammy and a wah, and that's kind of it.
And the electrical is the main base for them as well.
Yep.
Killer.
Yep. Kind of left the Gibsons behind, just because there's so much flying at this point, and like I'm just so nervous of traveling with like a vintage instrument with a through neck. So yeah. Like, these electrical guitar companies with the aluminum necks, it's like you can just throw it in a trash bag and check it and not worry about it, So, like, as long as you have your Allen wrench set to tighten everything up, it plays fine,
That's wild.
Maybe run a hair dryer.
Stuff actually like loosens up over time, you've noticed?
Yeah, the only weird thing about the all aluminum instruments is that with temperature change, the intonation goes sharp. Is that right? I think it goes sharp.
If it gets cold, it should go sharp. Yeah, as things contract. Yeah.
Yeah. So like as you play it, um, I can't even remember. First time I play a set on it, I'll remember. Oh yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, things will flatten out over the course of the set, I imagine, as things get hot, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the first song is always like a little bit of a cross your fingers thing. But even just like all the hardware, all the screws, particularly these guys, those will loosen up quite a bit if there's a lot of temperature change. So I tend to go through it with my Allen wrench set every so often on tour just to kind of tighten everything down.
Smart.
But otherwise, it's a sturdy, reliable instrument. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring it out to play. Let's see some stuff, man. One of the questions I wanted to ask is that I know I have I cycle through them, but I have like a typical Soundcheck riff that I bust out every time to make sure stuff works. Do you have something like that you almost always play?
Yeah, it kind of depends. I feel like, there's always those certain things that you fall back on. And I think a lot of it is, if I'm dialing in a new amp, like if we're playing a festival or if I'm, in Japan or Europe or somewhere where it's not my normal rig, I tend to always kind of dial in the tone around an open A string. Just because, I probably should be dialing in around the lowest string since that's where most of the action happens, but something about just like a big open A is so satisfying. Like that's the range where I'm like, oh yeah, that and like a B power chord they're just like so immediately satisfying.
Yeah.
But as far as like actual riffs, there's a couple No Means No riffs that are kind of my go-to.
And are you guys in standard tuning?
Oh no.
I
wish. Make my life so much easier. Yeah. Let's see if let me make sure this even works real quick. Hold on a second. My two laptop scenarios here. Okay, yeah, that's working.
Cool.
But yeah, so yeah, I like to warm up with It's Catching Up by No Means No, just because it's kind of a busier one. Something that kind of like gets all the strings out of the way, and it has a good open A. I feel like if you get that open A sounding right, then usually everything else kind of falls in place. And yeah, that's kind of a go-to thing I try out with. As far as my own riffs, Geneva from Russian Circles is one that I usually will bust out during Soundcheck, just because that's another one where if I can kind of get the first few riffs of that dialed in, then I know everything else will kind of fall in place. Let's see if I can get this tuned up here. So yeah, one second. So that would be That's something that I usually have like an octave down added on the whammy
Oh wow.
just to add like a little low end girth. And then I have the Dark Glass Alpha Omega Ultra as kind of the baseline grit. And then that opens up into what I guess is the chorus, which then has the Fuzzrocious Rat Tail added on top of it. And that's just all power chords. So I love power chords on like the upper strings of the bass. To me, there's something just really satisfying about those.
Absolutely, especially with a couple of layers of dirt. It really,
yeah,
extremely satisfying.
Yeah, so those are always kind of good warm up and dialing things in. Riffs. Yeah, those are kind of the main ones I usually start with.
That's awesome. So something like Geneva, when you guys were writing that, how did that all come together? Do you recall? Is that something that you brought to the band with that bass riff as the main feature?
That was kind of one of those weird ones that just sort of oddly works out where I think Mike kind of had the opening riff sort of kicking around in his head, and then it all just kind of fell in place. There wasn't like a lot of deliberating about it. Like Russian Circles spend almost as much time like writing or talking about what we're going to play as opposed to actually playing it. It's very methodical and sort of like predetermined. But every once in a while I'll write a song and it's just kind of like, it's all just sort of intuitive, like first idea is the best idea. And that was one of those where, I think we had one or two riffs and then the song just kind of wrote itself just through jamming it out in a practice space.
When you guys are discussing those kinds of things, what are you trying to determine? Is it like you're figuring out the creative brief for the song or like the mood that you're trying to evoke, or what is being discussed? I'm just curious.
Well, like so much of Russian Circle stuff is based around Mike setting loops.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're a 3-piece, but at most sections in the material, there's like 2 or 3 guitar lines happening just because Mike keeps stacking and layering things. So that kind of makes it that, we're not really a band that can just like jam that stuff out because Mike has a system to it. Well, I have to like have at least 2 passes to get, the loop set, and then I can layer things up this way. So a lot of times it's just like the strategy. And if something's going to change at a different part, it needs to be discussed. If there's going to be some sort of modulation involved, that needs to be discussed. And I don't know. I think we're also just like kind of old and lazy. So it's like, we don't want to exert all this energy into like playing stuff if we can actually like communicate to each other beforehand. It's like, all right, you're going to do that 4 times and you're going to make the change, and and you're not leaving practice with a tired drummer and blistered fingers. So
yeah. Well, as a dyed-in-the-wool Botch fan, I'm curious about some of the iconic bass lines that you played in that band. Like there are just so many. It's a really long break in where you're playing the chords, and I'm terrible with the song names because none of them refer back to any of the lyrics. Is it possibly Swimming the Channel?
You're probably thinking of C. Thomas Howell.
I think I am. Yeah. Which I noticed somebody changed the song titles on streaming services. Is that right?
Oh, really? It's entirely possible, but I have no idea.
I think the last time I looked it up, it just said C. Thomas Howell and left off the rest of the traditional song name.
Oh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Entirely possible, but if that's the case, it wasn't anything that was discussed amongst the band.
Right on.
Yeah, that was that one. I mean, that one was another example of, the song was pretty close to done, and we knew we wanted to kind of transition out of, the sort of more frantic opening half of the song, and then segue into, the Dave sort of melodic tapping moment. And Botch, as a general rule, was very anti-melody. We were always sort of worried that melody always just seemed really like obvious. So if you started going too deep into the route, you wound up turning into one of those bands that had the emotive chorus with the shrieking verses, So
Oh yeah,
we were pretty allergic to melody, but that one it was just kind of, it's really just root notes to whatever Dave was tapping. So I think it was like a C. Hold on a second. And make sure I got I just want to make sure I don't record over anything here.
yeah. With that song in particular, it seemed like Dave's stuff and your melody or counter melody was almost working against one another. I mean, I know that it's a melody, but y'all were definitely not cooperating in some ways.
Yeah, well, I remember it being like a little combative, because I think in my youth with Botch, it was always trying to make things more complicated than it really needed to be. I think the guys were like, no, just play like three notes, just dumb it down. And so
yeah, but the tension is what makes it different and probably like really effective in a lot of ways. I mean, the fact that you didn't just play the three root notes, or you eventually resolved to that after going, taking it some other places.
Yeah, so I mean, that was just like what was it? It was just oh man, it's been so long.
It's your fault.
Ooh, that's not even right. I don't even remember. That's a little embarrassing.
To be fair, we did not expect to be quizzed on this today, but
yeah, that is it. It's just a C power chord, drop D, open string, and the E note. So, and then just carries through on the whole rest of the song that way. It's probably one of the dumber Botch riffs over the years, but
dumber, but super effective. I mean, I think it's effective because, like you said, the first half of the song is so busy and active, and it sets up, it's like the tension of the two things like set against each other. I think makes it super cool.
Yeah, and I think that was like one of those important lessons as a youngin', where it's like, oh, sometimes less is more. If you can say it with three notes, that's cooler than saying it with all 12.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question. Is there one stupid trick that you can teach me today to make me a better bass player?
Ooh, man. I see, and again, I don't know, because I think so much of what I do unconsciously. It's like I was saying earlier, with Botch, it was so much just all strumming from the elbow, so I was just breaking all the strings. And with These Arms Are Snakes, I kind of started learning that I had more control if I latched my pinky under the G string, kind of anchored my hand in place. I could just run through more notes without it muddying up. I think that was maybe a very obvious thing. Again, if I had taken lessons, it's like, yeah, like mute all the strings you're not playing. But as a kid, it's like, no, I just want to like bash on it. So, that's not going to be educational for you, but I think for people that are starting out, it's like, yeah, like if you can just mute every string that you're not playing, rest your palm on the low strings, like hook your pinky under the G, and you have it's probably something that doing it consciously is tricky, but over the years, once you kind of learn that, it becomes a real game changer in terms of I don't know, pulling things off. That's all I can really think of, honestly. I wish I had some like cool arpeggio sweep or something to reach some people, but I'm just not a super trained musician. I'm kind of like a dude that's always been in bands, and I'm always like the weakest link that somehow manages to ride other people's coattails. So, yeah.
I feel like that's all bass players to one degree or another, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. We're just like the dumb music nerds that are like, well, I want to do something. All right, bass works.
Totally. So. Yeah. All right. Well, this one I bet you can answer. My last question before I let you go is tell us one amazing / stupid / horrific / hilarious story from the road.
Oh boy. Okay, let's see. Maybe narrow down the criteria a little bit. Like what kind of bad story do you want?
It doesn't have to be bad. It could just be hilarious. Like, I don't know. Is there a best gig, a nightmare gig, a thing where got left at a Polish gas station, a border thing? Like, I don't know.
Oh man. I mean,
the worst place you had to sleep on tour. It could be anything. Everybody has stories about European squats. You got one of those?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's always hard. I'm always the worst place you sleep on tour story is always like the really easy go-to one. But I always feel sort of bad about it because you're always kind of criticizing someone's hospitality in some capacity, or it's like, oh yeah, that person that we stayed with that had the long hair cat with, dreadlocked shit stains all over its ass that kept like rubbing up against you in the middle of the night. Like, that was terrible, but like that was someone's beloved cat, and they put you up for the night. Sort of feel bad shit talking that.
Worst hospitality in Europe? It's generally pretty good, but do you ever have any like weird German unidentifiable meat products or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think, I think one of the worst places we ever stayed was in Lyon, France. It was with These Arms Are Snakes, and I don't feel bad talking trash about this one because our host was not the coolest guy, but it was like, a miserable show. I remember, it was like in this bar that held maybe 50 people, and they like kept wanting us to turn down, and it was like this constant battle through the whole set where it's like how, like, what volume are we supposed to play at if we're keep being told to turn down?
My amp is basically off at this point.
Yeah. Like every cab had like microphones on it, and it's just like, just don't microphone my cab. Like, if you're trying to like mix us by like, getting a signal off of a bass amp and then mixing it in this room with 50 people, like, just strike the mics and we'll just do like stage volume. Like, that's totally fine. But I think they were trying to record the set, so they were trying to like, I don't know. It was like one of those super combative nights with the club where it was just like, we're doing everything we can to play well, but like everything was sort of conspiring against us. And then the kid who booked the show, not the kid who like actually worked at the bar. He didn't actually work at the club, but he was like some outside promoter. It was like, well, you can stay at my house. And he took us back to his loft, and he like led us into this room, and you could only access the room by like going through a shared bathroom. The layout of the place was really weird, but you had to go through a shared bathroom, and then you were in this sort of like communal living room scenario. And he immediately turned on like a full wall projection of a Kiss movie. Like,
Phantom in the Park.
yeah. I hate Kiss. So, maybe if I was really awake and really excited about staying up and really into Kiss, it would have been nice. But it was just like, all I want to do is go to bed. But instead I'm just like forced to like watch this like wall size projection of a Kiss movie. And, it's like, okay, well, there's a couple couches, so we were trying to argue over who got to sleep on one of the two couches. But all the couches, all the cushions were just like littered with cigarette butts. Like they were all chain smokers that lived in this place, and they would just put out their cigarettes on the couch. So there was just like burnt cushions and cigarette butts, and it's like, well, we'll just flip the cushions, it'll be fine. And then we flip the cushions, and it's like, oh, you're not the first person to have this idea. Because the underside of these cushions is even worse. It's like, this isn't even a couch. It's like two giant combustible ashtrays that, so there's already this precedent set where it's just like, oh, this place is filthy. Okay, like these people have a very different standard of like, I don't know, like what kind of place they want to live in. And then, I made the mistake of asking the guy, it's like, hey, is there any way I could get like a glass of water or something before I go to bed? I'm kind of thirsty. And he just looked like really confused and like led me into the bathroom and then went into his garbage and dug through his garbage until he found an empty plastic water bottle, and then handed me the empty plastic water bottle and then pointed at the bathroom sink. And it was like one of those moments where it's like, again, I don't want to like talk trash about anyone's hospitality, but I was like, how is this not like a fuck you? Like, it's like, this has to be a guy being like, fuck this American. Cause like, you're literally fishing trash out of the garbage to like, give me a glass of water. Like, so that's probably not like the grossest or most awful place I've ever stayed, but it's one where it's like, I don't feel bad talking trash about that one. It was just
incredible.
Awful. So, I don't know. What's your worst place you ever stayed at? I want to know your dirt.
Oh, for sure. The Poison Lawn somewhere in Tennessee. Did you ever play this? It was like a known punk house, like a squat.
Okay.
I don't remember which city it was in Tennessee, but we were on tour with Batilis, I feel like, and it would have been, I don't know, 2012 or something. This is with Kowloon Wild City. And so we'd already played a show, and then we like drove an hour to get to this place. And then we like played another, we set up and played like another half a set with Batilis. And then, so it's like 4 a.m. everybody's completely exhausted and we're just laying down and we like roll out the sleeping bags or whatever. And as we're all about to drift off to sleep, somebody goes, yeah, you guys should probably know that we had bed bugs a while back. We think we got them taken care of, so we think it's good.
Yeah.
And so just as soon as we'd rolled out the, sleeping bags and everything, rolled them back up, loaded everything back out into the van, and just, I don't remember if we drove to another town or got a motel or just crashed in the van or whatever. We're just like, I do know that the next day we got to Atlanta and we just like nuked all of our worldly possessions in like the hottest laundromat dryers that we could find.
I've never encountered bed bugs, but like 2 years ago on a Sumac tour, I got body lice on tour. And
gnarly.
Like no idea how. I'm a very hairy person, and it was like a tail end of summer tour, so I was wearing shorts, and I tend to wear very short shorts, And I initially got them on the back of my thighs. I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe I had just like a sweat rash or something from playing, but it's like this kind of persistent itching, and then it like kind of migrated onto like my belly, and then I was like, oh, I got like a sweat rash on my belly. And then one day like I was looking a little closer, and I was like, oh, I have lice. How did I get lice? And all I can assume is that I was sitting on like a backstage couch or something with my thighs exposed, and because at that point it's like I've slept at so many squats, slept at so many punk houses, I've slept in like all kinds of unhygienic, sad locations. But now it's like, now I'm in my 40s, and it's like we don't do that. Like we like that's one of the perks of being a little older and having enough money on tour to like always have like a decent bed to sleep in. So it's like no one else on the tour got it either. So it was just me. Just I somehow got body lice. Didn't engage in any sort of behavior that would have transferred them, but I sat on a bad couch somewhere. That's another thing you have to worry about now on tours, that don't ever rest a part of your body that has hair on it on a purpose that might contain lice, because you never know.
Yeah, well, luckily that's not anything that any of us have to worry about for the foreseeable future.
Yeah,
since we're stuck at home.
One of the few things about COVID I'm not missing is body lice interactions. But, yeah.
All right, Brian, thank you so much for making time and sharing your insights with us. This was super awesome. Is there anything that you've got in the works that's does not that isn't touring, records or projects that you're working on that are imminent?
No, I mean, Sumac just had a new record come out earlier in the month. That's called May You Be Held, and that's still new and exciting to us. And then Russian Circles had planned on being on tour all year, but yeah, that got messed up. So now we're just working on a new record, remotely over the internet, file swap and all that. So we'll see how long that takes, but it's kind of a new process for us, and it's kind of exciting and different. So
cool. Well, I can't wait to hear whatever it is you guys come up with next. It's going to be awesome. And Brian Cook, thanks again for taking the time, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.